It's my pleasure to introduce our host today, Todd Miles, Market Enablement Director here at CLEAResult. So, Todd, I'll hand it over to you to introduce our other panelists and go over today's agenda.
Uh, Thanks, Nick. Do you want to go ahead to the agenda slide? So nice to meet you all. Market Enablement Director here at CLEAResult. I'm focused on IRA Homes in Here program across the country. I come to you with 15 plus years of residential experience. Started as an energy auditor through various things before starting the Healthier Homes practice here and now working on IRA. I'm joined by my colleague, Matt Braman, the Business Intelligence Director here. He has a slew team of dedicated analyst. He is data all day, every day, in his data analytics. He's going to talk about really across all our sectors of the business, as well as all the parts of the programs that we run. His team interacts and improves customer experience as well as program performance, as well as joined by Andy Frank, the founder and president of Sealed. Sealed is positioned as a aggregator in the market, working on homes in Hira as well as on programs as well. Andy has long experience in founding founding companies that with positive environmental impacts, and serves on the Alliance for Clean Energy New York as well as the board for the Energy Efficiency Alliance of New Jersey. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to help facilitate the conversation among the three of us, and then I'm going to be managing the chat and questions, looking at the questions you have for us, because we're very much hoping this is an interactive session. We really want to hear what you're thinking about and what questions you have as our two experts go through their experience. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start with a simple grounding about what we're going to talk about today and what we mean when we talk about measured data. Andy is going to go through how the measured savings approach is positioned in our sector and thinking about that. Matt's going to take us through some actual real world results of some of the ways we're using measured data today in our utility programs in different aspects of the business. And then Andy and I are going to finish up talking about the measured path in IRA, how implementers and aggregators can work together, but also really, again, thinking about how the Inflation Reduction Act and that programming is going to come back to our utility programming and what that means for the future, even after IRA as we wait for it to get started. So without further ado, Nick, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll get going. Okay, so just a few quick words about measured data and consumption data and thinking it through. I think if you go to the next slide, Nick, I think a lot of people, like when you think about measured approach, we think we're entering the matrix, right? Like we're getting into something super advanced, complicated. And I just want to check in and ground ourselves in knowing that what we're about to go through is nothing more complicated or different than really what our industry's been doing over the last 30 years. This is not a red pill, blue pill moment, right? It's a continuation of what's happened. So I have this up here. If you consider energy auditors going into homes, there's a lot of talk in IRA about utility bill access or utility data access, and there's no better data access than when you're in a home and the customer hands you their bill, right? And because the reason is, grounded in building science principles, we can tell so much from that 12-month read, right? Whether it's the same month in the previous year, understanding what's changed, understanding the shoulder months of May and October here in the Northeast, and then understanding the loads of the summer load or the winter load. The auditor uses that consumption data to say, okay, what about the home that I'm looking at? And how is that going to inform what I go after? How am I going to help this customer? You go to the next slide. Moving from that paper data and being in the home, very quickly, all of us across the industry said, okay, let's bring that data into our software. So again, we're just using consumption data, bringing that into our software and saying, great, now that we know the as-is conditions in the house and helps us understand that, let's use energy modeling, the interactive effects, to understand the future a little bit and see if we can assess through consumption data, help us inform not just the as-is conditions, but the future conditions. Once we've air sealed and insulated and putting in a new heating system, we know how much energy you're going to save. This, of course, is the principle behind the modeled approach in IRA, and this is where incentives are going to be. So I mentioned that because no matter what, we're still just talking about that consumption data, that bill data, that utility data It's all in the same way. It's just in what place do we look at it? And this measured approach is not a new thing. We have a lot of partners across the industry who've been working on this. Recurve is an excellent example. They have a great platform, a great partner to us. They've been working through, as have we, different ways to use that metered data, that actual measured data at the end of the process, rather than relying solely on the model in the beginning. So I think that's where I wanted to start. And Andy, I'm going to give it over to you to talk about sort of that measured modeled approach in more detail.
Great, thanks, Todd. Really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this webinar. As Todd said before, Andy Frank, I'm founder and president of Sealed. We are a climate tech company on a mission to stop home energy waste. I think something that hopefully everyone on this webinar shares. We do that by providing software and solutions to contractors, in some cases homeowners, enabling them to install more home weatherization and electrification projects and grow their business. So in other words, we're really trying to focus on providing the tools for contractors to sell at the kitchen table, kind of what we would refer to as kind of the battle of the kitchen table to advance the cause of energy efficiency and electrification. As part of that, we serve as an aggregator for projects for utility and government incentives, and we'll talk a little bit more about what aggregation means later, but at a high level, it basically means that we handle all of the rebate processing and payment on behalf of the contractors. So that's kind of what we do, and at the core of our DNA is really measurement and performance. We believe in putting our money where our mouth is and really focusing on actual energy reductions, which is why we're so excited about the potential for measured savings programs. The reason that we see this potential being so great is really goes back to what I would say is kind of an age-old tension of program design between accountability and scalability. And when they work together, right, when you get both of those things together, you can produce sustainable market transformation. But traditionally, this balance is really hard to accomplish. To get more accountability, right, we're using taxpayer, ratepayer dollars, and accountability is really important. A program typically asks for more inputs from contractors and homeowners, right? That can be detailed home and project characteristics to calculate, energy savings model or other deemed savings models, running different tests, blower door efficiency tests on the equipment, etc. And the more inputs that a program asks for, right, you get some more accountability, but it also makes it harder to scale because then there are typically more soft costs with contractors. And so contractors, typically, as you can imagine, and probably many of you have experienced, don't want to participate in programs with lots of inputs and requirements. And so many of them will either not participate in programs, which kind of reduces the impact of those programs, and particularly the longer term market transformation potential, or they'll participate but have to raise their prices to homeowners, which obviously also is not a great outcome. So this is kind of the tension that we're trying to solve. We go to the next slide. The way that we think measured savings really addresses this tension and kind of resolves it is that, instead of focusing on inputs for a measure of accountability, which is what lots of programs do today, and again creates this tension between accountability and scalability, measured programs focus on a single output. Actual energy savings, kilowatt hour, therm, MMBTU, which means that you get actually more accountability typically than you would get from traditional programs, because you're focusing on the thing that really matters, the actual energy performance. But it also dramatically simplifies the process because you don't have to require nearly as many inputs as you would require for a traditional modeled or deemed program. So we'll talk about a lot of the details of this a little bit later, but kind of conceptually, this is I think the nub of why measured savings programs have so much potential to really lead to market transformation. Next slide. And so if you kind of look at this matrix of kind of scalability and accountability, the way we see the potential here is that, again, measured programs have the potential to get both the highest levels of accountability with the highest scalability relative to other program models. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have options for non-measured approaches. We'll talk about that later. We think that there should be, that they can work, measured and modeled in particular can work very well together. But it does mean that if you can offer a measured program approach in a given market, we think it has a lot of potential. And I want to end this part by apologizing for my cat has lots of opinions on measured savings programs as well. So she may voice them from time to time through this hour.
Thanks, Andy. So, and Andy's cat as well. So, Matt, I think this is a good time for you to go into some of the details, moving away from the sort of larger programmatic, larger industry questions into some of the specifics that we've done in some utility programs.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Yeah, so I'm going to talk through a couple of examples of how we use meter data in our programs. As Todd said, a lot of this we're doing it already, and these can be the building blocks to start to transition to a measured approach and can help minimize risk and maximize accountability in a measured program. So first, I'll show some examples of how we use meter data to target customers, and then I'll go over examples of how we use meter data to guide QC and improve overall cost effectiveness. Next slide. So when targeting customers, we can use meter data to infer characteristics about the house and measure eligibility. Answers to a few simple questions like, does the electric meter show seasonal variation? Can inform whether we want to offer an electric or gas measure. A flat gas load profile tells us they have gas CHW and don't heat with gas. This is basic information that our marketing teams should really have access to. Next slide. And when this information is readily available, we can develop much more complex campaigns like this example of Rocky Mountain Power. Here, we're promoting 3 measures: dual field heat pumps, ductless heat pumps, and evaporative coolers in 3 states, Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming. We had a limited number of emails, so we really wanted to make sure each one counted. And if you follow the flow chart on the left, you can see we first segment by cooling, then we segment by heating, then by the presence of gas service. And then in Utah, we had a propensity model that we applied at the end. And so the key to this type of work is having the info available prior to the campaign planning, because as we all know, these marketing campaigns have a long lead time. Because of the meter analysis we did, we also ended up doing a direct mail campaign to the top targets that we didn't have emails for, which was also very successful. And the next slide. And then, we can also combine meter data with property and audit data and create all sorts of predictive models and energy performance and energy potential scores for homes. And as Todd was saying, all of any of this requires is simple monthly data. Even for advanced data-driven targeting, we don't need AMI data. If we want to address peak loads, we just need simple features or metrics, such as average daily kWh in June during peak time. We've done a lot of work recently with PG&E and some of the features that they've been providing for consumption-based targeting. We can also do a lot of targeting analysis using anonymous data until we get down to the final target list. And when last, the customer doesn't need to know any of this is happening. They just get a relevant offer. Now I'm going to switch to moving along in the process after a customer has installed an eligible measure. You can jump to the next slide. Thanks, this is right. The concept of Smart QA combines meter data with post-install site visit data to better understand the drivers of high and low savers. This is especially important for programs facing cost effectiveness challenges and for low-income programs. So after the install, we gather data. Once we have enough time has gone by, we start to analyze the sites and select candidates for QA visits. From there, we schedule, conduct a visit, and analyze the trends. So next, on the methodology, we're simply running pre-post billing analysis ourselves and using the results to dive deeper into savings drivers than typical program evaluations. One key difference between targeting and Smart QA work from a typical M&V process is that we're really interested in the cooling and heating loads and base loads, not just the total loads. This gives us better understanding of how a measure is performing. And once we have the billing analysis results, we can bin customers below based on usage. Below is an example of what we would use for heat pumps in a heating climate. And I also want to call attention to the dogleg graph on the left. This is a measured performance program, so we're going to get a little technical, but I promise not too much. But it's important. Just in this example, we want this dogleg graph showing the correlation between the monthly energy usage and the outdoor temperature. In this case, the customer has a base load of about 25 kilowatt hours per day. And as you move to the left, it gets colder, and you can see usage going up to about 45 kilowatt hours per day at 45 degrees. And if you move to the right, you can see a slight increase as AC kicks in during warmer weather. This is a very typical Northwest, dogleg. So the next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about some recent work we did for Energy Trust of Oregon. They have measured level cost effectiveness challenges with the heat pump measures and wanted to visit some high and low saver sites to start to understand the key drivers. And it's really important to point out that this heat pump measure was designed to replace electric resistance heating. So first, we looked for the pre-post data for projects that had been installed going back to 2018. And then we categorized these projects into large reduction, small reduction, and low baseline. We had about 700 high users and 700 low users in the end. And I just want to acknowledge that vintage, square footage, and HSPF were almost the same across the high and low users. So this isn't as simple as targeting older homes or targeting bigger homes. Then we conducted the site visits. We went to 21 large savers and 22 small savers, and we looked at the trends. And I'll say there isn't really that much to look at for the high savers unless you want happy customer stories. These heat pumps really do work well when installed and used properly in the right applications. So we focus more on the low savers, and the table below is a quick summary of what we found at the 22 low saver sites. So 23% had exogenous factors like adding square footage or occupancy changes. Another 23% had install issues, such as controls improperly set. And then 59%, this was a big finding, it was programmatic issues, such as supplemental fuels or replacing an existing heat pump, right? We're not going to see a lot of savings for a heat pump replacing a heat pump. So now we're going to take a look at a few site visits and the meter analytic results. And we'll start with the high saver just for fun, but then we'll look at a few low savers. All right, so these are all these sites are in Oregon. This is in Salem in the Willamette Valley, home built in 1980, 2,500 square feet, a nice balance point, capacity tested out well. Customer tells us it's true, set it and forget it, homeowner. So we can jump to the next site. We're going to see the blue line is your reporting period, and the red line is your baseline period. And you can see the home's consumption in midwinter dropped from 90 kWh per day to 50 kWh per day, with an estimated savings of over 6,000 kilowatt hours. You can see the slight uptick in cooling in the warmer weather. This increased load is negligible compared to the heating savings, but I bet this customer is a lot more comfortable in the summer. This is, again, a great happy customer story. We found many of these, 10,000 kilowatt hour savings, 8,000 kilowatt hour savings. Really interesting case studies, but again, this is heat pumps working as you would expect with a COP of 2 to 3. Now we're going to look at some of the low savers. So in this case, another smaller home built in 1970. If you look at this, the controls were a mess. And they also had a DHP installed that was not rebated through the program, so there was no way to know ahead of time. So let's jump to the next slide, and we can take a look at the energy savings for this one. You can see the base load going up due to the added conditioned square feet, and the heating loads going up as well because the aux heat was coming in at 50, and the compressor was locked out at 35. The two graphs just below just represent 2 different years, same house. We did that when we had enough data. And like I said, the controls of this home, were not set properly, and the customer added a ductless heat pump to the garage. Let's jump to a couple more. So this next home, this one seemed like it had potential. Larger home built in 1986. Controls looked good. Really great example here of an auditor doing this type of a site visit. They really have to be curious. They need to be looking for things. If they're just going to check the box that the expected equipment was installed, we're not going to learn a lot. So in this case, he's talking to the homeowner. They came in, they saw the wood pile, obviously a red flag. Homeowner tells them they're leaving for 4 months, in the winter, obviously big impact on energy consumption. So we can jump to the next slide and take a look at the bill, at the energy consumption. And you can see here, there's some energy savings, but pretty small. The wood heat is really having supplemental fuels is having a big impact on the energy savings, as we would expect. So let's look at one more here. And we're going to jump to this last house, larger home, 1958. Controls look pretty good. But there was right away the inspector could tell that there was a non-functioning heat pump, that this replaced a non-functioning heat pump. So again, we'll take a look at our dog legs, and we can quickly see, as expected, right? A heat pump replacing a heat pump, we're not going to see a lot of energy savings here, and this is against the program rules. So there's obviously these types of things are very actionable. Working with the contractors, who did the work, to remind them, or whatever the process is, but also getting ahead of it, and some of these program design elements here really starting to work closer with the market to better understand how these can be avoided in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Andy, talk a little bit more about what these types of programs could look like in the future.
And actually, before you do, Matt, I'm going to ask you a question off. Can you talk a little bit, to put you on the spot, about So this is the results once you identified the homes to go to of interest. Is there anything also to talk about the process of finding those homes of interest? Any backstory or anything you can add to it? It's sort of like the process there and how you're able to get access to and use that data to then say, okay, I know my high savers, I know my low savers, et cetera.
Yeah, in this case with this client, when the customer comes in and participates in the program, they know they're agreeing to access to the energy consumption data, which what gives us the ability to use that data in the program. Honestly, getting into homes is hard, and so once we identified our high savers and low savers, by the criteria, we really just kind of turn the machine on and start the outreach and start scheduling, and you kind of work through your list, and you're just trying to really get homeowners to engage, because it's not easy getting back into homes 6 months to a year after the measures have been installed. But again, our programs are good at engaging customers, right? We just have to go through it. We can call, we can email, we can get 2 or 3% response rate, and we can get those customers engaged. And also, there's a potential in the future, I think, to further sort of set this up in a way where it's a customer service, right? I mean, if you're coming back, you're still looking at they participate in the program, you're coming back and looking at how things went. A lot of customers, perceive that in very favorable light. So, hate to say it, Todd, but sometimes we, just try to get anybody we can once we've done the bidding into different categories.
No, that makes sense. And certainly informs the future. I was thinking about that customer service point as well. Like I would imagine customers, a phone call that says, hey, you're not saving what we thought you would. Can we come and take a look? Seems like a pretty attractive offer. It's not many times you work with contractors where you have that ability to do that afterwards. Great. And there is a question in the chat that I'm going to save for after this next session. So Paul, I see your question. We're going to get to it. But I welcome anyone else. We have time. Welcome anyone else to put a question in the chat as we keep going ahead. So, again, we're going to set up measured approach. Andy and I are going to talk about the measured approach in IRA, but I'm thinking about this as a proving ground for measured approach, right? We saw from Matt the ability to use measured data currently in our programming and all sorts of ways for it to enter existing workflows, not create new ones. And I think that's relevant here because if you go to the next slide, there's been we've been talking about IRA now for 2 years since the legislation came out, and Andy was certainly been part of these conversations as well. Of there's a lot of measured versus modeled conversation, right? And I think what hopefully I hope we've moved to more of a measured and modeled conversation because that really seems to be what we're talking about. And it's really interesting from our viewpoint as an implementation firm. We really recognize the 80% similarities between the two approaches. So if you think about what we do a lot, obviously, when we're implementing a program, but one of the core functions that we're interested in is processing rebates, confirming that it's fully compliant, and then once compliant, paying that rebate to the contractor or customer or whoever the actor is, the aggregator, whoever the actor is in the program that has carried that rebate with them. So to us, measured and modeled, you're always going to hit a moment where many things are the same, and then it's our role to confirm compliance and pay that rebate. So if you look at the next slide, there's an old video out there of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs talking, getting interviewed together, and they confirm that actually there's a little bit of Apple software in the original, a little bit of Microsoft software in the original Apple IIG. And it's just sort of interesting. You always think of this, Apple versus Microsoft piece, but in fact, in the early days, they sort of worked together. I feel it kind of reminds me of this. It doesn't feel like there's that much difference. If you think of the time of the assessment, Andy can speak more to this, but I think without question, if you're going the measured path, you're going to have to do some modeling to at least understand the potential of the home to save, right? So that you can plan for what those measured savings at the end, a year after installation, are going to be. And then obviously you need to model the home with BPI 2400 modeling tool for the measured path. For the modeled path, that's where the incentive is. And it determines the incentive, what you model at the home. Makes sense. And then you would think, okay, well, then a year post, on the model path, I don't have to measure. This is not true. It's very clear in the guidance that there is a 70% realization rate threshold that the program needs to meet, which means you need to be using measured data and understand measured data to see if you're reaching that 70% threshold of actual savings. And if not, you need to take corrective action. So here we are all of a sudden in the same place where we're doing some modeling in the beginning and doing measured measured data 1 year after. The main difference between the two being about when the incentive is paid and how the incentive is paid. And I think if we look at it in that light, we sort of realize that we're just working on and workshopping and having the opportunity to think about when that incentive is paid and how it affects the market and what's the best place for it to be in the market going forward. And that's why at CLEAResult so happy to promote both the modeled and the measured path, because we're both very comfortable with either from our position. So with that, though, I do, Andy, if you want to jump back in, kind of talk through some more details on how the measured path works itself, because I think it's always helpful to kind of go through the very deliberate steps about how it's outlined, and I can jump in at any time if you want me.
Great, thanks, Todd. And yeah, please do. And yeah, so we've been talking at a high level, obviously, about program theory and some examples, but to just kind of get into the meat of how the sausage is made, and in a little bit of an oversimplified sense, but hopefully helpful, walk through kind of how these measured savings programs are designed, as well as in a little bit how they integrate with modeled programs as well, as to Todd's point. So how does all this work? I think the first thing to understand, and this is honestly a big misconception that we hear a lot, is that the household and the contractor have a very simple experience. They receive their rebates upfront from the aggregator based on simple inputs and sharing historical energy usage. So the contractor and the homeowner do not have to wait to get paid out based on the rebate. They're getting everything up front. So it looks very similar to how they'd experience a program today, just simpler. So at a high level, I think the best way to think about it is, I always love using a mullet analogy. Think about it as kind of a mullet program design, right? It's very simple business in the front for the contractor and the household, with an aggregator party in the back. So the aggregator, someone like Sealed, provides the rebates up front to the contractor and the household based on the expected energy savings. So we're doing our own kind of internal analytics to kind of Todd's point before. We use statistical models, predictive analytics, to basically be able to say, hey, how much energy do we think is actually going to be saved in this home? And we give a rebate up front to the contractor and the household based on that, right? And then under a generic program participation agreements, you can think of this as like a pretty standard type of like trade ally agreement that a program would have today with contractors or others. The aggregator then provides all of the project information and energy usage information, both prior to the install and after the install, to the implementer, someone like CLEAResult, obviously. The implementer does what implementers do today, right? Which is review the projects, perform QA, QC, and provide rebate payments, among other things. The big difference is that this is not just simpler for the contractor and for the homeowner and the customer, but it also means that the implementer can do all of those kind of traditional functions through a more data-driven approach, the kind of things that Matt walked through before, right? Can basically do the same kind of functions, but just do it better, because you're having a more granular understanding of how projects are performing, what's working well, what's not. So you can be more targeted with QA, QC, with analytics to be able to improve program outcomes even more in the future. Next slide. And then the other big difference is that the payments come to the aggregator, again, not the contractor or the household, come to the aggregator over time. So it's not a single rebate program; it's a series of partial payments over the course of about a year or so. And so I'll keep saying it. Broken record, as I mentioned. If you kind of walk through this slide, the contractors and the household receive the rebates upfront from the aggregator. And this actually usually means that contractors are getting paid faster than most programs are allowed to pay. So this is another kind of benefit that we've seen to the contractors is quicker cash flow turnover, so they can reinvest and continue to grow their business. But the aggregator receives payments over time. It's typically on a quarterly basis based on actual measured energy reduction. So we're using usually open source advanced M&V software, something like OpenEE Meter, to be able to track the energy reductions over time, and the payments are then kind of invoiced based on those energy reductions. There are also typically upfront partial payments to minimize the total carrying costs, right, of kind of providing those payments over time. So this is a program decision. We've worked in programs that have a 50% upfront partial payment to the aggregator, programs where it's 20%. You decide to have no partial payment, and there's different tools you can use like energy savings insurance to kind of mitigate the program risk for that kind of thing. But basically, those are the kind of like program design considerations that each program can determine. Last slide. Next slide.
Yeah, or I'm going to ask a question before you go on. If you can go back one step before we keep going. So I think one of the question we have here from Paul is, what happens if savings aren't achieved? And I think that's a pretty common question, Andy. So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, it's the $1 million question. So I think the first thing to really acknowledge is that this happens today, right? Projects happen all the time, and savings are not what at least the customers kind of expect based on however those savings are getting calculated, and that's something that I think really hurts our industry, right? We're really trying to all make energy efficiency to be a real resource, and when outcomes of energy reductions don't match the expectations that are put there by by the public, by ratepayers, and by the program participants themselves, that really hurts kind of the common mission that we all have. So in a measured savings program, but today basically the kind of near-term accountability for that is ultimately just with the household themselves, right? If I install a project that doesn't save as much energy as expected, that's bad for that household, but kind of nobody else is really bearing the weight of that accountability. The contractor goes on and sells more projects. The program reports whatever savings of that. With measured savings, there's a really core stakeholder that has accountability, and that's the aggregator, right? If Sealed is providing an upfront rebate for say $2,000, and that rebate and that those savings aren't what we think they are, we take the hit, right? We're providing the upfront money to the contractor and the household after the installation of the project, and so if those savings aren't there, then someone like Sealed, the aggregator, is taking the financial hit for that, which we think increases trust in the process, because contractors and households doing that really, we think, increases trust and performance. And over time, that then gives aggregators like Sealed an incentive to make sure that contractors are properly incentivized to do good work. We're doing our own QA, QC to make sure that we're working with the right contractors, that they're doing a good job, and giving them education on the best practices to maximize energy savings.
Thanks, Andy. I think another question, I think before you keep going, I don't have an answer to this, so and I have a suspicion, we'll see. So Gabriel asked, why did regulatory bodies settle for the saving standards, sort of the input in your original model, Andy, instead of why is history dictated that this input way was the way to go instead of the measurement model that we're discussing today? What's the historical reality of that?
How deep do we want to go on that? I mean, you can it goes back to Ralph Kavanaugh and the kind of beginning of the energy efficiency programs in kind of the late 70s. I mean, I think the honest answer is, especially in the early days, it was seen as prohibitive to be able to work with real data. I think, despite your great points, Todd, about how if you have a meter, you have data, right? If you're getting billed by your utility, then you by definition have data. I think that it also has to do with a lot of the earlier programs have been high volume but lower savings. So things like lighting, for example, right? It's harder to kind of see the impact of that in kind of the noise of your energy bill. I think now with the lighting phase out and with kind of a greater focus on kind of deeper home energy retrofit measures like heat pumps and weatherization, you get a pretty good signal pretty quickly from those homes. So kind of the measured approach is more is more scalable and viable there.
Yeah, and I'll add, and Matt, you can jump in too. I think you mentioned lighting. I was thinking of, many states use technical resource manuals where the state has approved an algorithm for savings. Because of the interactive nature of a home, doing that for insulation, air sealing, heat pump installation is maybe not optimal, is one way to say it. But for lighting, it's just math. Like it's just fine. It's, how many kWh did you have, or and how much are you putting in? And we can just do some math and get relatively reliable savings of cost. And I think, Andy, that's a really important point. So that as we no longer have that core element in our programming, this is yet another reason why this measured approach is going to start to make more economic sense for these programs that didn't need it before. Great. Yeah, go.
I was saying, and the other thing I think more related to the program design or the need for the program design is that as programs shift more and more to these deeper measures that really rely on the contractor to be the point of sale entity, right? It becomes more important to have program designs that are simple enough for the contractor while retaining the accountability, as opposed to a lot of, again, kind of lower cost measures that have traditionally driven a lot of energy efficiency portfolios where you can go kind of direct to consumer and not have to kind of work through the contractor. So I think that's another kind of driver of what's going on as well.
Yep, 100%. All right. Encourage folks to have more questions, but Andy, if you want to finish up on this slide, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, just to kind of wrap up kind of what this looks like from beginning to end, and I think wrapping in I think very good point that Todd made. Todd, you made around modeled and measured kind of program designs working together. We've talked about there's a lot of workflow similarities, but they not just can work together, right? We think it's really important that they should work together, because the one big challenge with measured savings programs is that some homes don't qualify because they don't have enough energy data. So if you just move into the home, or you have some sort of fuel situation that makes it difficult to retain your records, or to properly calculate a baseline, or a few other scenarios, right? You don't want a program that people can't access for arbitrary reasons, right? I think accessibility is a really important principle for all the programs. So you really want to have a modeled, at least a modeled option in programs for in particular for homes that don't qualify for the measured program option. But they look, as you can see, pretty much the same, right? You have a project submission, a reservation, an enrollment with all the kind of required program data. The difference being whether you require energy usage history, kind of pre or post, depending on the program design. And then the payment is, again, pretty simple. There's an upfront payment in both. The only difference is with model, it's the full payment versus a partial payment for measured, which then gets trued up over time based on quarterly performance payments. And then also in the measured approach, there's this concept of a non-routine event. So if you kind of got a project installed and then you added an electric vehicle or a hot tub, or you moved, right, or some way where your total energy baseline changed, or you weren't able to measure the savings anymore, it's called a non-routine event. There's different ways to kind of deal with that and kind of pay out an expected amount, but that's kind of the difference. But at a high level, it's pretty much the same stuff with a few nuances, for the measured pathway. Should we wrap it up?
Yep. And then, having said all that, I think, Andy, I'm sure you talk about IRA a lot. I know I talk about IRA a lot, but I think one of the strengths in having Matt's presentation and show work that we've already done and the industry already has is that I think we want to see if we can get past just thinking about IRA as the end to what we're doing. I actually really think that IRA is the start of something, and that is a place for us to work through these operational details that we discussed. Right now, unfortunately, we're still just discussing the plan, And then once, as we all know, once we have the opportunity to get in and make this program go, we learn that much more as we're able to solve problems that maybe didn't come up in our planning, but that we're able to figure out and then bring to the next time we do it. So this is really this incubation period on measured data that I think is going to be really kind of exciting. And I'm looking for the IRA programs to be a chance to do that, and then immediately bring those lessons learned to our utility partners and our utility programs. The other thing I do want to mention that we've been hammering on, and Andy just said it, is we don't think this has a huge difference for the customer. And this is one of the things that, so I am totally biased towards energy auditors, given my own experience and how many I've worked with. But there was really something interesting about what Andy said. If you notice that anytime there's divergent paths in a program, the best time to make those decisions is when a trained expert's in the home and can help the customer make the best decision for the customer. And one of the best parts about us working together in this industry is there's no reason not to do what's best for the customer. There's never an ulterior motive. What's best for the program customer is what's best for the program. It's going to get the most savings. It's going to get the most energy measures installed to the most benefit, etc. So because of that, I think it's really critical to see that these trained experts, once they're in there, say, hey, let me take a look at your house, and then let me figure out what's best for you. And it's really something that's done across the country by energy auditors all the time. And this is nothing new. And so I don't want to lose that. It's done by energy auditors and done by contractors as well. I don't want to exclude them. It's one and the same. Experts in the home making decisions on the fly based on realities. They're very much able to handle, small variations in the workflow based on what's best. And then, Andy, you did a good job of showing these paths that can be on, as again, just to emphasize, as implementers, no problem. Like, we're going to be paying this rebate as part of our role, no matter what. But as much as we talk about a measured path and one long piece of the IRA project, what Matt really showed was that it's happening as we speak. So what are the opportunities in your program? To the folks on the call, I'm interested to hear questions and encourage you to kind of bring some in as we enter the Q&A period of the webinar. How can you pull this into your existing programs, or what's needed to start to add in elements in QA/QC and customer targeting? How do you bring more measured data into your existing program? And what questions you have around that? So with that, there are some questions coming in, and I encourage others to type them in. I'm sort of monitoring here, but we can start to go through some of them. One of the questions, Matt and Andy, I kind of give it to both of you. When we talk about measuring data, can these methodologies document peak demand reduction or other timing indicated savings measures? Interested in both your perspectives on that question.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on on the utility what their goals are. We would need more granular data to look at anything to do with peak time. So if you're trying to do M&V or savings analysis and trying to get that time element, you would either need to use get more granular AMI data or apply pre-existing load shapes, to the monthly data. And there's probably a lot we can learn from, applying the pre-existing load shapes, depending on, again, how they were developed, how recent they are. Yeah, so I think that's, yeah, I'd stop there. Yeah. And one more thing, I just said the features, right? I mean, there's a lot of, when it comes to targeting, right, we're not going to ask anybody, give me all your AMI data for all of your customers, right? That's too sensitive, right? But there's features, like I mentioned, with PG&E, they're giving us these metrics, like summer cooling metrics, June, demand, June average daily demand during peak period, right? We can use that, in our targeting. If you want to target customers with the largest peak, that's good enough, right? And we can anonymize that data until we we have our target list. So there's a lot of ways to sort of get creative, try to minimize, the use of AMI data unless we really need it. But ultimately, to get to that true, like that peak time for the savings analysis, you would need the more granular AMI data.
Yeah, totally agree. And just to build on that, we're participating as an aggregator in a few market access programs in California that do take into account time. So the payments that we get are based on not just rebate payments that come through are not just based on total energy reductions, but are based on basically time, in some cases location. So this is active today in the market. It does require access to AMI data, although you can also do seasonal, right? You can say, hey, we really want to lower the winter peak reduction, so we're going to value peak. We're going to value the savings in November, December, January, February more than we're going to value them in the shoulder months or in the warm parts of the summer. So there's different ways to do it. And one of the things that I think is a really exciting opportunity for states is in the IRA in the homes program, it actually encourages states to incorporate time, location, and/or greenhouse gas reductions into the calculation of the measured rebates. So there's kind of an opportunity for states to do that, and we view that as kind of a down payment on virtual power plants, right? Once you start providing incentive levels for this, it creates an ability to really treat this as a resource rather than simply kind of spending the dollars and getting them out the door. And that's really what the project that we're excited to be contributing to more broadly is trying to translate this market from one that is ultimately kind of a programmatic kind of compliance function to one that's really a real energy resource that all of the utility and grid planners and everyone can really rely on to drive the future of a decarbonized energy world.
And Andy, I feel like you sort of did just sort of define it, but I do want to invite you to define virtual power plant. It may be in a little more detail for anyone on the call who maybe hasn't heard that term or hasn't heard it explained.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I will tell you, in fairness, you ask 5 people their definition of virtual power plant, you'll probably get 5 different answers. So take with a grain of salt. But my definition is simply any is basically a virtual power plant is an aggregation of distributed energy resources, and that can be anything that reduces load permanently, things like weatherization or efficient HVAC, or things that reduce load temporarily or shift load, right? Like demand response, batteries, certain types of solar programs. But anything that is a distributed energy resource, aggregation of distributed energy resources that is able to be incorporated into planning and markets, into energy planning and markets, is kind of my broad definition of VPPs.
Yep. Anything to add, Matt? Or?
No, that was good.
Yeah,
we don't want to confuse the topic.
Great. So I'm gonna ask another question. Going back to IRA for a second, and again, I encourage we have a few more spots before we finish up if anyone has more questions. But we talked about what happens if the energy isn't saved, the aggregator carries some of that burden. And then we sort of talked about this idea, I think if I heard you right, about customers might not be sort of set up to save based on modeling. And so it's great if they have a separate path. Because the question I got was, can we define which homes qualify for measure modeled according to the IRA? And I'll open by saying the guidance from the DOE, while very detailed, does not actually get into this home shall be modeled and this home shall be measured. It's a state-by-state choice to how that's done. But Andy, I don't know, and tell me if not, it sounded like maybe there is some calculation there at what level you can discuss kind of figuring what's best for a homeowner when you visit.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to your point, there's really two parts of this, right? So the first part is what's kind of incorporated into the program design, and that's really a state by state decision, right? And obviously our hope is that states allow for broad accessibility from a program option perspective, modeled and measured, as well as from a technology option, as well as from a customer base. So single family and multifamily, all the eligible technologies, all the program options. So that's kind of the first bit. So assuming kind of everything is available, right? Then from a kind of practical perspective, there's actually, we haven't gotten the nuance of it, but there's actually 2 different kinds of model, right? There's calibrated modeled, which is, defined in the IRA at least as basically a BPI 2400 calibrated, online essentially online energy audit, and that uses historical energy data to basically calibrate a model and make sure that it's accurate, right? Using different pieces of kind of approved software, and then there's uncalibrated model, where if you don't have that energy data, right, you just moved into the house or for other qualified reasons, then you still run a model, but it's kind of a pure physics model, and you're using things like variance on home energy score calculations, for example, to kind of get the best proxy. So when we're going into home, assuming all of those kind of options are on the table, what an aggregator is going to do is provide whatever is the best value to the customer. Based on our calculations in the IRA, the measured path where available is almost always going to provide a higher rebate level than the modeled path, and so we're going to want to give the higher rebate level. Where that's not the case, right, then you want to be able to make sure the contractor kind of knows their options and can do something different. But the key use case for us is in cases where they don't qualify for measured, we need to be able to still be able to ensure that the contractor can provide the homeowner with a modeled rebate based on an uncalibrated model. So I think the practicalities of this will be basically like whatever is available and whatever is best for the final customer.
Yeah. And not unlike, Matt was showing flow charts about decision making and targeted marketing earlier. Very similar flow chart in spirit, though not saying, okay.
Yeah, well, and all of that gets, yeah, and in practice, the way that works is it all gets coded into software, right? So we have kind of software that our contractors use to get access to these kinds of rebates, and so we have a lot of kind of if-then logic kind of built into that of like, if you don't have this, then we'll offer you this. If you have this, then we'll provide you with that.
Thanks, Andy. And if there are any follow-ups to the questions from the folks who asked them, please submit a question. I see a question from one of our favorite clients here, and I will say, Matt, maybe answer this. For our clients who might be at this and say like, oh, this sounds great. How do I get CLEAResult to start doing this in my program? Right, I love this. What is the guidance that we give our teams, and how do you work with teams to start implementing these sort of things?
Yeah, it's changing processes in these program operations is hard, right? And so we really, like a marketing campaign, if we say marketing team, before we do the next campaign, we want to run all these analytics, and or we need you to stop and wait a month, we really have to. And then even if they wait a month, right, you're changing processes to incorporate this type of information, and so we really have to work with the teams, sort of bring them along with you. We're talking about complex topics that maybe our marketing teams don't fully understand. They don't live in this consumption-based targeting world, and then same thing on the operations side, right? We have contracts to do QC with our clients. There's machines that deliver that, for high volume programs, and so how do you again get into that process, right? Even if it's just a small pilot, let's just take a few one auditor or a few parts of the program, but just starting small, testing it out, because it does take if you want to do something in the fall, it's probably start now or it's too late, right? Or for consumption-based targeting, I'd say start to do the analysis this year, right? Incorporate it into the marketing plan, in Q4 that you're going to deliver in 2025. And so it's, I think it's definitely takes a couple of years, I've found, for really the robust consumption-based marketing or targeting that we did with like Rocky Mountain Power. It takes 2 years with a strong marketing team to get to, where we got with that program.
Yeah, and when you say 2 years, it's 2 years of a process. Right?
2 years of process and incremental improvements.
Exactly. Yeah. Iteration after iteration until you're fully loaded and ready to go. So yeah, so the question as always is time, right? But we're ready if we're given the time to do it. Thanks, Matt. That's really helpful. Let me check the questions. I don't see any others, and it looks like we're pretty much wrapped up. So Andy, thank you so much for joining us. Your insight, Matt, you as well. Really appreciated having the chance to hear both of you talk about this topic. And as I keep saying, I think it's a perfect time to continue to push on this. There's a lot to come, and it's not just IRA, right? So thank you both. I appreciate it, and I think we're ready to say goodbye.
Thanks, Todd.
All right. Thanks, everybody.